I'll pass over to John. Please give him a warm welcome, and he can finish off introducing this topic. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Royd. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Fulton. I'm Chapter Lead Scrum Master for Sky down at Leeds Dock. What I've been up to for the past sort of year or so has been helping to transition the development of Sky Kids, the Sky Kids app, up from London to Leeds. That's been successful. The teams are established and they are now delivering. But what we had, though, as part of that transition is a bit of an objective to become more data-driven. So if I could sum that up with a quote, it would be this: without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So that's really what we're trying to get away from, this kind of subjective, anecdotal decision-making, to actually some facts and evidence behind the decisions that we're making. So Formula One, I've been a Formula One fan for many years. And for a lot of those years, I've also been involved in Agile software development. So I see a lot of parallels between Formula One and Agile. Formula One is product development, so it's about building the fastest car, but not just for the first race of the season, but the team that generally wins is the team that's done the best job at iteratively developing their car all the way through the season. So that's a lot like Agile, really. And of course, the other thing that Formula One teams are great at is using data. So I thought it'd be an interesting place to look for some ideas. But it didn't start at Formula One. At this time, when we first got this objective, actually what we were really doing is building teams. So everybody was new, and we were really working on team dynamics, forming, storming, norming, all of that kind of stuff. This is Leicester City, so obviously they won the Premier League last season. And they did that with a team that perhaps on paper was only expected to be about mid-table. And for me, that's kind of the definition of a team. Like, they came together and they achieved something greater than perhaps the sum of the individual parts. Okay. And the other thing I thought as well, actually, is while we were in this kind of team building phase, that perhaps moving to a data-driven approach could be a little bit of a risk for those team dynamics that we were trying to build. So the other thing I was thinking about as well is this Deming quote: 95% of the performance of an organisation is determined by the system and only 5% by the individual. So the reason I was thinking about that is because we were all new to this large organisation and we were trying to understand our place within it. If we think about organisations as systems, and all the different moving parts and how they influence each other, you can kind of see what Deming was talking about. But if we try and apply some measurements to the sort of Leicester City example, let's imagine we were trying to measure how many goals Jamie Vardy had scored in a season. We're not just measuring Jamie Vardy there, we're measuring the whole team. We're measuring how well that team is being managed, how well their training regimes are off the pitch, how good they've been at signing players, the financial management, the youth team setup, the people coming into the team. So all of these things go into that system, and eventually you get some measurement out the other end, which is how many goals Jamie Vardy scored. So in our industry, we've got a bit of a sordid history with data. It's often been used in a bit of a negative way, perhaps carrot and sticks type management, perhaps more stick than carrot. Ron Jeffries, one of the joint authors of the Agile Manifesto, said that the results that you tend to get when you use metrics tend to drive behaviour in such a negative way that actually perhaps we just shouldn't bother. This is a story about Alaska Airlines Flight 261 that crashed in California, and it crashed due to a lack of maintenance. Alaska Airlines believed that their maintenance was great because they had all the forms, everything was filled in and all the boxes were ticked. But it turned out that the engineers had been cutting corners. So wherever there is fear, you'll get the wrong figures. Perhaps what's telling about this particular story is that when that plane asked the airline if it could divert to Los Angeles, they were told to carry on because the airline was worried about the impact on the schedules. So culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's all very well having data, but actually having meaningful conversations about that data is the hard part. So it's easy to have data, but having the culture set up where you can have constructive conversations without harming anyone in the process, that's hard. So we really had to think about that before we set off on our journey. And we asked ourselves some questions which I think our industry actually needs to kind of ask itself too. So can we do better than that? Can we build better data-driven cultures? And I think perhaps Formula One is an interesting place to look for some ideas. So data usage in Formula One, this is just one event, the 2014 US Grand Prix. 243 terabytes of data were collected during that one event. These guys in the picture here, they're not actually at the circuit. They are back at McLaren's headquarters, analysing all the data as the race is going on, looking for any kind of competitive advantage that they might be able to gain. So that seems to me to be quite a far cry from that traditional carrot and stick style management around data. We talk about autonomy and ownership a great deal in Agile. It's motivating for people. We'd hope that we get a better quality job as a result of people having that. But for me also, what's really important is it enables faster and better decision making by the people who are closest to the work. If you have a look at this picture here, we've got Jensen Button and Lewis Hamilton with their closest engineers around looking at the data, probably between a practice and a qualifying session. And they're looking for any competitive advantage they can find. Who you don't see in this picture is Ron Dennis, the head of McLaren. He's only really going to get in the way in the middle of this conversation because the experts are already there having that conversation. So the question for us, I think, was, can we build cultures where the teams want to review their own data because it helps them find the better ways of working? The goal in Formula One is really obvious. We're going to have the fastest car, we want to be on pole position, we want to win the race. Ultimately, we want to win the championship. Goals in software development are not always that clear and perhaps not always shared. This is a story not from Formula One, but I think it's a good story, so I'll tell it anyway. This is when JFK went to visit NASA during the Apollo era. And the story goes, he was walking down the corridor and just happened to meet somebody in the corridor and asked them what they did. And they said, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. Turns out this person was actually just the caretaker. But such was the sense of purpose that everybody had at NASA at that time, they genuinely felt it was contributing to putting a man on the moon. So if we can build cultures where we have shared goals, perhaps we can allow the teams to choose their own metrics because we're all aligned around those shared goals. Formula One teams are system thinkers. The car is a system, has to be finely tuned, has to work, all the integral parts have to work together. This is a Bugatti Veyron. It's the fastest production car in the world. It'll do 268 miles an hour in a straight line. It's not going to win any Formula One races. This will go faster than any Formula One car in a straight line, but it's optimized to go as fast as it can in a straight line. It's not optimized for balance. As a Formula One car has to balance top speed with the speed that it can go around corners. So aerodynamics, mechanical grip, weight, all of these things have to go into the equation. So can we build cultures where we choose data that allows us to optimize the whole system, not just a small part of it, like straight line speed with a Bugatti Veyron? Formula One teams experiment all the time. This is Ronnie Peterson's 1977 Tyrrell. You might notice it's got 6 wheels. So this is an experiment. They use the wind tunnel a lot, so often they won't build out the whole solution. They'll build something, a model that they can put into the wind tunnel and just get data that way. It's the fastest and the simplest thing they could do to learn something. And sometimes they do something called splitting the strategy. So if it's a wet race, for example, when the rain starts, they don't actually know what the best tyre to fit to the car is. So what they will do is they will bring both cars in for a pit stop and put the intermediate tyre on one car and the full wet tyre on the other. So one of those strategies could well win the race for them, but they don't know which one. So it's like an A/B test. What can we see? What can we find out? So can we build cultures in which data helps us experiment? So all of these things, all of these thoughts went into what we were thinking at the time before we got started on this kind of data-driven journey. The simplest place for us to start was kind of the process metrics, so things like velocity and cycle time. It was the simplest, the easiest way we could actually validate some of this thinking and see whether we could actually build that culture. We started by setting the scene in the teams with a penny flow game. I imagine a lot of people in this audience will know the penny flow game, but for those who don't, basically you get 25 pennies, 5 people. First person flips all 25 coins and passes them to the second person, who flips all 25 coins, passes them to the next person. And you time how long that whole system takes. Typically it takes around 2.5 minutes. Then what you do is you reduce the batch size. So you go from 25 coins to 5 coins. The first person flips 5 coins, passes those along, flips another 5 coins, passes those along, flips another 5 coins, and so on, until everyone has flipped all of the coins. And when you do that, you go from about 2.5 minutes down to 30 seconds. But the particular variation of the game that we played, we didn't just measure the total system time, we also measured the time that individuals were taking to flip the coins. And when we did that, what we discovered was that individual times were going up, even though the overall system time was coming down. The system was behaving in quite a counterintuitive way. But what would have happened if we had just measured the individuals, we would have drawn the wrong conclusions. We would have believed we were getting worse when actually we were getting dramatically better. So for our data-driven approach, we wanted to agree some principles. We started with that we were measuring the system, not the individuals, for the reason we just saw in the penny flow game and for the story about Jamie Vardy. This is why. We were not setting targets. Targets will drive behavior in unpredictable ways, perhaps a little bit like the Alaska Airlines example. And the data is just there to give us better questions. It's not there to give us answers. The insights and the hypotheses that we generate as a result of those conversations come from the team. There's other people around the team in that conversation, but they're there to provide servant leadership. So listening to the conversation that the team is having and asking the question, how can we better enable you? We're looking for leading indicators wherever we can, because what we're actually trying to do is take some actions as a result of looking at that data, which is going to steer the ship. So we just got started with a few basic things. There's nothing sophisticated here at all. Release burn up, pass burn down. You'll have seen all of these things before. What we discovered actually is there's almost a bit of a Pareto principle with this, that by the time we discussed the burn up and the burn down, we'd had so much value from that conversation, and the other things were just kind of there as supporting metrics. So we set up a cadence by which to continuously review this. So we did it after every sprint. We got the right people in the room. What was really important, obviously, is the team are the number one stakeholder in that conversation. Optimize the format of the meeting. We don't want to be arguing about the process or what these graphs show. It's, we all understand all of the graphs, and therefore we can focus on having a conversation about the insights that we're getting. And this is just a place to start. So inspect and adapt, we will evolve from here. So some of our successes to date. So the burn-up chart, again, there's nothing sophisticated about having a burn-up chart, but what's been important to us is the quality of the conversations we've been able to have around it because of that groundwork that we laid kind of with the culture. So on the kids project, we have very fixed deadlines. We want to release just before the school holidays. There's usually a bit of a marketing push as well. So if we're going to fix the time, we have to vary the scope. And what we've been able to do is, because we're reviewing this so often, is have really constructive, mature, grown-up conversations with all of our stakeholders about what's actually going to be in the release. And working this way, we've actually hit every single date that we've had since the transition up to Leeds, which perhaps wasn't the case before. Also, cycle time. So this is real data from the team. When we inherited a backlog and we started working on that backlog, we discovered a lot of these stories were really, really big. So we focused on how can we break these stories down. What that enabled for us is our product owners got much more opportunity to see the work as it flowed through rather than waiting for sprint reviews. And also our testers, when we first started off, we were really waterfalling the sprints. So all of the testing would happen in the last sort of 2 or 3 days. Once we broke the stories down, we had testing happening right the way through. So the team now has this kind of have a feeling of what good looks like, but they can also verify that with the data. And if we start seeing different cycle times, it will prompt that conversation. So where might we go next? So what tends to happen in these conversations is there'll always be a part of the conversation at the end, which will just be, how are things in general? So as soon as we ask that, again, we're back to the possibility of things being subjective. Perhaps there's some group think, some group dynamics type issues. So perhaps we could have some soft metrics and happiness index or something along those lines, just to make that less anecdotal. Or we could get much more sophisticated with the data that we're recording. So we could start to look at things like flow efficiency. The flow efficiency is where you compare how long something is queuing for against how much time you're actually working on it. When you first measure this, typically you'll find about 5 or 10% of the time you're working on something. The rest of the time it's actually queuing, waiting for someone to pick it up. If you think about what we're actually trying to optimize, often we're trying to optimize just this really small part of the system. This is a visualization of that. So the white space there would be queue time, and then the colored space would be time you're actually working on something. That is obviously just made up. You can create that in Excel easy enough, but if we can get the data to be able to build that chart, that might be really powerful for us. We could start to look at cumulative flow. So cumulative flow is something I worked with a lot before. It's a really powerful chart. From this, we can see how quickly we are burning up through the tickets. We can see how much work in progress we've got. We can see how much work is in a particular state at any time. And we can see a proxy of how much lead time we're taking as well. So all of that information from just one chart. So that could be interesting. However, I think where we really need to focus, I think this quote will probably help us. So there's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should never have been done at all. So all of those process metrics are really, so far, I've really been asking the question, are we going fast enough? Are we going to hit this date? But what we want to build is a whole balanced scorecard, which actually gives us a view of the whole system. So not just are we going fast enough, but are we building what we're building to sufficient quality? And of course, are we actually building the right thing that our customers want to use? Now, we actually have all of this data in all of different places, but bringing it together and applying that culture to it is, I think, where we need to go next. So that's the end of my talk.